Until I was 18, I had
Okay.
not met a single person I didn't even know that it's possible to do a career in doing research. Every year,
Okay.
I always dropped the subject that I was best in. I was first in all of state in the civics and in administration. I dropped that. Then I uh, was best in chemistry, and then I dropped that. And later on, I was better in mathematics, but I dropped that. I kept in physics. And to my great surprise and incredible pleasure and honor, Fanon actually replied saying that the book was wrong. You're right.
What kind of mind is so driven by an inner compass that it consistently walks away from the subject it excels at? What kind of audacity does it take for a young student to write to Richard Feynman, point out a mistake, and be proven right? This is the story of that student, young Professor Abhay Ashtekar. One of the principal architects of loop quantum gravity, a leading theory that seeks to unite Einstein's relativity with the quantum world, a holy grail of modern physics, right? In this first of our conversations with him, we'll uncover the journey behind that incredible beginning, focusing on his formative years in India. It's more than just a biography, it's a masterclass in the power of self belief, the courage to follow your curiosity over convention, and the development of the intellectual rigor required to tackle the universe's biggest questions. Let's begin at the very beginning of this remarkable story. Good morning, Professor
Good evening
Ashtekar.
for you.
I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today. Before we begin, I want to express what an honor this is for me. Your work has been so influential, and having the opportunity to document your life journey through these interviews feels truly significant.
Since you sort of express your feelings, I also think that it is very nice that you're doing this for science education and outreach. And I think this is very important for young people. So I also want to thank you for doing this.
Today, I'd like to focus on your early life, your childhood, schooling years. I understand you're born in Kolhapur
No,
in
no, I was born in
1949.
Shirpur. I don't know why all this wiki page and so on is wrong.
Okay.
So I was born in Shirpur, which is it's a kind of it's a small town in Maharashtra, quite far from Kolhapur actually. And my father was in civil service, and at that time he happened to be in what in India we call revenue department, and so he
Yeah.
was stationed in that place, and that's where I was born.
So, sir, you're born around 2 years after India became independent, right? So, could you share with me your earliest memories about growing up there during that time? Also, give us some idea about your family.
Okay, so I don't have any memories of Shirpur. The reason is because, as I mentioned, my father was in this Maharashtra government civil service, and so following the British tradition, all these reasonably higher officers were transferred every few years, and so we moved a lot. I went to at least five schools, five different places. So I don't have much memories from the place where I was born. But starting from the next place we went, I do have some memories. They were called the main towns. I think in some places they are called tahsils. In Marathi, it's called taluka. So it is like the district is divided into few talukas or tahsils, and then each tahsil has many villages and such thing. So this was kind of in one of these tahsils, and so it was. Growing up in those days, I mean, cars were very rare. We actually did have a house, and there was a stable next to the house, and stable had horses and buffaloes, and got fresh buffalo milk and such thing. And apparently, I had some, and I don't really remember exactly what happened, but when I was very young, apparently I had some kind of a allergy towards the buffalo milk. So they got a goat for me, so that goat milk was just for me. So these are kind of countryside memories, so to say. But I think by the time I was 3, I was already interested in some, very elementary mathematical things and so on. Since it was a very small town, my father had asked some teachers to come and give lessons to my older siblings. And so they would go. And in those days, we had the little kids, I guess it'll be shocking for people to hear this now, but the little kids had this abacus, they're like, there's a little wooden frame. And there are
Yeah. With wires
beads,
and
exactly,
beads
but
on it. Yes.
lot of the big beads, and that was how you learn
Beads.
counting 1, 2, 3, and 10, and such
Yes.
thing. So I had my abacus. So apparently I used to go with my abacus on my shoulder and sit there, even though I didn't understand what they were saying. Just learning this kind of thing. So
It was the early exposure to the
right, just
counting.
counting kind of thing. And then we again moved in this place that I was just mentioning. We had this house, and the house had a little terrace. And one of the strange things that happened is that I actually fell from the terrace as a little kid all the way down
Oh, oh,
into
okay.
there was sand there. And I got some things that are very faint now. The sand particles got something. But here, so it was quite a traumatic experience.
Yeah, yeah. Your parents would be possibly scared and rush you
Yeah,
to the
yeah, I'm sure
doctor.
they did all those things. I don't. I probably fainted. I was probably unconscious or something like that. So, I just to tell you, the kind of little life that it is not that everybody was always supervised. There were servants around, but it's not that everybody we were looked at all the time.
Give us some idea about your parents. Like, what was their background in terms of profession, and what kind of exposure you got at home before started your schooling?
So, as I mentioned, my father was in civil service in revenue department. His background was that he had a law degree. This was the British Raj, right? I mean, before independence. When I was born, he was already a Tahsildar or this Mamledar is what they call in
Oh,
Marathi. Throughout his life, he was known as very uncorruptible Puritan thing. I mean, to this extent that people felt, well, you shouldn't be so Puritan because it really hurts your career and such things. People would tell him. I mean, he had reasonable influence because in those days, in his next stage in his career, when he was the deputy collector, and deputy collector was in charge of several talukas, or several tehsils, so to say, and then he was also a magistrate. So there will be he would hear cases, and these cases were not criminal cases; they were typically revenue kind of land and such sort of cases. So it was quite amazing. But when I was growing up, right? I mean, I was in school and so on, people would approach my friends' parents to try to influence my father, and my friends and their parents knew not to not to do this. So he had a very strong reputation of being, and I think that it's probably true that being so principled, he could have advanced more if he had been more quote unquote practical in terms of dealing with his superiors, etc. His duties involved touring, because the idea was to go and check out everything in those area.
mhm.
And so he was not often at home. I mean, he was at home about half the time. Not half the time he was touring. My mother actually came from a economically slightly higher background. What happened is that when my father was in law school, he had a friend. By the way, my parents, I mean, they belong to the Jain community in Maharashtra. And so he had a friend who was also in law college and was also a Jain. I mean, in those days, there were so few people going for higher education after the bachelor's and such.
Yeah.
And so they became friends. And so my father used to visit his friend. And my mother was the sister of this friend. So basically, how they met. So in those days, it was quite unusual, to say the least, that they basically chose each other rather than having a regular arranged marriage, which was very, very unusual. And surprisingly, again, a very unusual thing was that my parents, they always called each other in the respectful tone. In Maharashtra, the usual thing was that the wife called husband, to me, that is to say, respectful, whereas the husband called wife tu, like in French,
Yeah,
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 or
yeah.
German, they also have these two things up here, or tu or tum or ap, So, but my father and mother, they always call each other in the respectful tone, right? Up, I mean, in Hindi it would be up. They would always call each other up. So it was not a completely conventional family. It was not totally different either. And again, I grew up as in a Jain family, but they were not super religious. In other words, we did not really have prayers or pujas, etc., Jain pujas, something. We did go to the Jain temple in town once in a while or something. But then we also went to, you know, Shirdi Sai Baba. So they went to all kinds of things. It's not nothing very, very religious. So my mother grew up in a small village, but she did actually complete her matriculation, high school diploma. So she was the only woman in a big area. So they were not extraordinary by any means, but they were not average either. I mean, they had this intellectual values very deeply in them, and I think that's what they communicated. Maybe this happens with everybody, but as I grow older, I'm more and more grateful to my parents. I mean, I can't imagine how many things they did for me. When you are growing up, you take things for granted. Even when I was in 20s or something, I just took for granted things. Of course, they're my parents and also. But now, almost every night when I go to sleep, I really have their images, and I sort of am full of gratitude for everything that they did for me. It's a very loving family. And the other thing is that when it came to career choices and so on, so all their children, they did not put any pressure. Should do this, you should do that, which was another totally unusual thing compared to the, you know, uh, friends.
To the traditional families, go for engineering, go for medicine, and
Yeah,
do
and
this.
now
Yeah,
probably
that's
in
what.
IT and
Yeah,
business. But
yeah,
in those days, it
correct.
was always engineering, or in my days, it was always engineering or medicine, and that's it.
So, how did your interest in science first developed? Perhaps during your school years,
Curious.
or was it kind of an immediate attraction, or did it evolve over time? So, could you tell us about that?
Right. So I, I mean, for whatever it's worth, I mean, I was good at school. My sister was also very good at school, and I was good, and so I was always first in the class and such things. So I did like mathematics in early days, right? In the elementary school, there's no science, almost no science. I mean, this was mathematics, and I liked that. By the time I was in the fourth standard, and that was in Pune, and it was a Deccan Education Society was a very well established place, and this it was called Bal Shikshan Mandir, which was in
Hmm.
Pune in
Hmm.
Deccan Gymkhana. I went to that school, uh, and then at the fourth standard in those days there was at least in Maharashtra there was a statewide competition in which I think mathematics was a big part of it, but there was also Marathi literature, local literature, and so on. And I did get that scholarship, which was considered to be uh, honor in those days. And it was a very pleasant experience. The teachers were very nice, and I did get interested more in mathematics than in the beginning, than in say languages, more or less from the beginning. But then really the big transition occurred roughly when I was in seventh standard, and that is when
Mhm.
they start teaching specific science classes. Until then, there are general science, and then there was a physics and chemistry and biology, two separate things, and there's a little bit more detail, and you start learning about Newton's laws and such things. And so that was more focused. So I realized at that time something which was quite unusual. I mean, it was a big thing for me, a sort of a
Mhm.
surprise. I should backtrack a little bit. My family was always interested in literature and such thing, and so we used to get a lot of magazines, and in those days there were these local libraries everywhere, and so you subscribe. It was not very expensive, and you could get a book out for keep it for 2 or 3 days and return it and such things. And so I used to read a lot Marathi. I did not know any English in those days, and so Marathi books and Marathi things.
Mhm.
So I was quite interested in literature. But then around fifth standard, you start learning a little bit of English. But by seventh, I was started getting exposed to some kind of literature. And then it
Hmm.
suddenly occurred to me, realized that what I thought were great novels or a great piece of literature in Marathi, not I thought as a little student, but they were acclaimed, that they really were kind of more or less derivative works in the sense that the main ideas came from the English literature, the older English literature, or some famous works, and these were adapted to the Indian side, something like that. And I realized then that what is considered as being valuable, or what is valued by the society, by the culture, etc., in say literature.
Mhm.
And I realized that this was
Yeah.
very localized, that it was very culture dependent. And then one of the unbelievable greatest ideas of all time that Newton had, right? That the moon goes around the earth and the apple falls down figuratively. that they are subject to the same law. Only the initial conditions are different. The moon had its initial trajectory, which has initial velocity, which was different from the apple came from round, right? And to me, this is, I mean, even now, right? I get goosebumps about that. That there can be such universality in the physical universe, and so that made a very deep impression on me. And somehow at that time, I felt that. Um, but physics in particular, universality of physics in particular, because these were very fundamental laws compared to say chemistry or biology. I was very attracted towards that. So there was this realization, which came in a way of by understanding the relative nature, subject to culture and background of other human activities compared to fundamental science. That fundamental science is universal. That the fact that English didn't matter. Newton's laws were used exactly the same way in China as in Japan, as in Australia, as here in India, and so I think that is very important. Even within Europe, there are great literary figures which the neighboring countries have not heard of because they were not translated. And whereas here, this universality has made a huge difference, and that is what attracted to me science, and particularly towards fundamental physics.
Okay, wonderful. So, sir, it seems that you had access or you were reading, literature and other books, which were, of course, beyond the curriculum. So you had access to these books, and that exposure to books opened up your mind and thinking and also interest in science. I mean, did you have teachers or any other influences other than books also, which kind of influenced you to pursue science through discussion or through other means?
Right. So I mean, school, not so much, I should say. I mean, it's not that I had a bad
No.
teachers or anything. I mean, they're fine teachers, but they did not really inspire very deeply. I mean, they enable me to go ahead, but it was
Hmm.
not a deep inspiration. Ironically, I was in this particular school, which was an English medium school. This was in seventh grade. I had a huge transition,
Oh, oh, oh.
and it happened in the middle of the academic year that my father was transferred from a place called Nashik to Kolhapur. And
Hmm.
then it was in the middle of the year, like around Diwali time or something like that. And then my parents thought that maybe it is a good idea for me to go to English medium school, but because in those days all the colleges, and maybe even now, colleges were all in English, and so there was a big transition for people interested in science, particularly if they transited from Marathi school to English. So they thought that maybe I should go to an English medium school. So they put me in the school, and that was a huge learning curve for me, right? Because I knew English at a very, very elementary level as one subject, right, in the fifth and the sixth standard. Now every subject was in English. So until then, I was involved in many sports, but at that time, then I started focusing because it was overwhelming. Luckily, before the year was over, I was again at the top of the class, but that was at the cost of enormous amount of work that went in. But in that school, they somehow did not put so much emphasis on science or mathematics even. And so I took quite a bit learn on my own. I mean, luckily I could. Um, I mean, so much so that in the last 2 years, our science teacher left for Africa because in those days, Africa was trying to recruit Indian teachers with high salaries, and he left. And they were not replaced. So my last year of high school, we had no teacher in the four of my subjects, right? I mean, I think physics and chemistry was one subject, biology was the other subject, and then regular mathematics. And I also had opted, because there's optional class, to call special arithmetic subject, which is big. I mean, one of those esoteric subjects which when you think about it, it has very little use. The idea was that they give you very hard problems, and you're not allowed to use algebra. You're not allowed to use geometry. You have to do it by arithmetic. By algebra, it will be a few lines, but you have to do it only using arithmetic. So, because special arithmetic and a little bit esoteric, it was, but not a challenging. So, four of my subjects, I had no teacher. I mean, no real teacher. I mean, there are some substitute teachers who came and went and such thing. And only for the three others, there were seven subjects: English, Hindi, and so-called civics and Indian administration. That's an optional subject that they were teachers. That gave a lot of freedom And that freedom I use.
Hmm.
So already at
Okay.
that time, I started reading a little bit of these popular books in my last years of high school. So say between the age of 14 and 16,
Hmm.
that in these books of George Gamow, particularly, I was really
Yeah.
quite thrilled with those books. I mean, particularly this 1, 2, 3 up to infinity, but there's also Mr. Tompkins in the Wonderland. There was a thing about he goes into the world of special relativity where the speed of light is very low. Then he goes into the world of quantum mechanics where h bar is very large, and then all these fluctuations happen,
Hmm.
etc. So that was very fascinating for me. All those books. So those were very good, and also just I don't know, having this freedom, not having this exam, preparing for that exam. In retrospect, it was very, very good. I mean, I'm not sure it's good for everybody. I mean, it is a matter of your perspectives.
Hmm.
So in school, I did not really have so much help with teachers. It was really, in some sense, it was really the freedom that I had. And I should say that this is something it may be useful for younger people to have this in mind. I mean, I was doing well in school, but the school was not considered to be a great. I mean, it was English medium, so that was its claim to fame. But in terms of sciences or something, it was not very highly placed. And
Hmm.
so,
Hmm.
I mean, one did not have any ways of knowing where you are compared to your contemporaries in other schools, which are Marathi mediums and such thing, right? I mean, and so I don't think even my parents, my teachers or something, I mean, they knew that I was very good, but they did not know how much it was. But when we had this high school exam at the end of 16 years, it's a statewide exam. It used to be in Maharashtra. I think it still is. And so, tens of lakhs of students
Used
appearing in
to
the same
appear.
day at the same. I mean, there was a week long, depending on subject matters, a morning, afternoon, etc., etc., appearing. And there I was placed. I mean, they always had a list of first 50, which are in this whole tens of lakhs or something like that. So, and I was placed in that list, reasonably high up. And so that was I mean, somehow I was the only one who had any hope of being there. I must say, neither my teachers had never even dreamed of that anybody from our school would be. Nobody had even got a national merit scholarship, which is like first 200 things, right? I mean, the whole time that we were there, before that. And my parents also didn't expect it. I mean, my parents actually had higher expectations for my sister, who was very good at school and such thing. But she was in a Marathi medium school, and so she had a better comparison, right? In that school, people did
Yeah.
get in this first 50 or something like that. But I mean, these are all this. I mean, I'm not saying this to say that being in first 50 is important or is an achievement or it means that you'll do better in life later on. But what I'm trying to say is that it's important to have inner confidence, even though the rest of the world doesn't place that confidence in you. If you feel that, well, you can do something, it's important to keep that and not be deflated or not be saying, well, I mean, nobody believes in me, so why should I? It's of course not going to happen. No, I think if there is something inner inside you, you should really keep it. So this is for the younger people that I'm really telling.
Yeah. 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 It's
Yeah,
very
that
important.
the believe in you. If you feel that way, then believe it. And do your best and see what happens. But I mean, you cannot just keep believing it. There have to be subject objective tests, such as this exams or publications or something, right? I mean, and so I think but don't give up just because nobody else believes in you. I think that's the lesson.
Result, when you got the result that you are in this top 50, teachers and parents, how
Oh,
did
they were
they, for them?
extremely happy, of course, and they are all kinds of ceremonies to celebrate this and so on and so forth. So it was something completely out of the expectations for the school up here. And so the only good teacher I had was actually Jesuit priest, because it was Jesuit school, and he was Robert Jacobs was his name, Father Robert Jacobs, and he taught English and he taught this subject called civics and Indian administration. And the reason I got interested in it is because part of the deal was to read the Constitution of India and understand
Mm.
various things. Now, compared to other countries' constitution, I think Indian constitution is way too detailed, and it didn't have to be so detailed in retrospect. But at the time, I didn't know that, and to me, it was a big challenge to
Hmm.
understand, what is okay, what is not legal, what is legal, and how we distinguish. What is the difference between presidential system and parliamentary system, and how things are done. So to me, that was very important. And he was a very, very good teacher. And in fact, in that subject, I actually was first in all of state, and they were completely taken aback by that. But because you are asking me about teachers and how they failed, so he
Hmm.
was extremely pleased. He might have had confidence in me, but not that I would be first in the state, but some, I would give something high level thing. He might have had confidence in me.
Hmm.
But in college, it was very different. In the first 2 years of college, I was in the same place. It was called Rajaram College. It is in Kolhapur. It was a very old college. Went back to early 1900s. Unfortunately, there was nobody there who was active researcher. I mean, until I was 18, I had
Okay.
not met a single person who's. I didn't even know that it was possible to do a career in doing research. I mean, we are professors, but professors were teaching, right? I mean, the whole idea was that you got your master's and then you taught. And so I thought that academic career to everybody was the nice career in which you went and taught, and very respectable. But the research was completely not known as a career.
Hmm.
So in the whole town of Kolhapur, there was no scientist in my days. Yeah.
That's talking about Rajaram College. Based on my understanding, you also got into IIT, but you chose pure science. Like, how did family and other react to that decision? Because in today's time, they generally prefer going to, engineering or medicine, and it's not normal
Or
to
IT,
choose.
right? Computer science, and also things like the business administration yeah. So in those days, there was only the first two options you said, which is engineering or medicine. My sister went into medicine, became a pediatric specialist. She practiced for many years. She's retired recently. So basically, when we were 17, you appeared for this exam, and there was this national selection thing, and I was selected. The question was about interview, and my father was going to accompany me because we had to go to Mumbai. I never, been to Mumbai, big city. There was a feeling
Hmm.
of being frightened and everything about it. So I mean, it was a big decision, and as you say, I mean, common sense said that of course you should go. I mean, that this is the best thing, or something. But I read these books of Gamow, etc., and I thought pure science was so good and such thing. But it's not easy. I mean, on the one hand, nobody put any pressure on me, which is amazing, I think, in retrospect, that
Hmm.
my
Hmm.
parents saw and just let me alone. And so I basically had to more or less struggle and internally and decide. I remember there was a corner in the house where I would go and lie down and try to sort of compare the two things, which I mean is my preferred corner of the house, so to say. I to try to say, well, what is a pluses and minuses and such thing. And then finally I kind of decided on pure science on basis which were qualitatively correct, but in detail where I mean I had no idea what pure science was. In those days I did not have clarity, but one thing was I felt that in engineering was more like maintenance, you know, to keep things running and fix things if they are not running or something like that. Whereas in science it would be more creating. And in those days, since I did not know anything about research or even journals and such things, I kept thinking that in science you can write thesis, right? That's the only thing I heard of. And so I thought one can write many, many theses. And so the science is you're not limited to one thing, but you can reinvent yourself many times. And that was kind of a naive, simple-minded idea, which in a sense turned out to be correct. I mean, that's exactly what keeps me, happy and has kept me happy for 60 years now since then.
Yeah, yeah, it's been a long, very long journey. We'll actually cover a lot of it as time goes. So, sir, before you move to your university time or the time when you joined Rajaram College and also Institute of Science, Mumbai, based on your own journey through school, what advice would you give to students today who are showing an early interest in research when they are in school at the moment, right? And particularly for those who, like you, are making important decisions at the school level.
At that time, I was the person who was growing up and so on and so forth. Now I'm older, so I also see my son growing up. And so there's a difference, right, between the attitude. And so I also see the limitations of what I recklessly believed in, if you like. I mean, they can be recklessness. Sometimes one can be lucky and one can find the right balance. So that's why I'm struggling. I'm trying to answer your question in a way that will be useful. That it's a matter of balance, As I like to often say that in a whole life, not just the science part, which I'll come to that in 1 second. Life is really like riding a bicycle. Why?
Hmm.
Because when you're riding a bicycle, it is in a state of perpetual unstable equilibrium. You tilt slightly and you'll fall down. So you go back and forth, back and forth. I mean, you don't realize it because you're so good at it. But when you're learning it, you see it, you feel it. I mean, you're going like that, like that, like that all the time. Life is like that. And so it is easy to be a little bit tilted and then fall down. This is the thing that I'm trying to communicate. So I don't want young people to take my words without these caveats. I want them to sort of realize that there are caveats in that. But at the zeroth level, I think that one should really do what one strongly believes in. If your heart is in something, I mean, it may be science, it may not be science, it may be music, it may be spiritual practices, which I have come to admire and respect a lot. So whatever your passion is, I think one should follow that passion. But with this touch of realism also, right? I mean, one has to keep in mind that for every musician who has been successful and could make a career, there have been maybe 50 could not make a career
Yeah,
out of
very
it.
few.
And so one has to realize this. But nonetheless, I think it is true that what I strongly believe that people who are interested in early on in science or mathematics should really pursue those interests as passionately as possible and believe in themselves. So this is my summary: that is, believe in yourself and pursue these interests, because you're likely to do the best work if you pursue your inner
Your
motivations, right? Not motivations that come from somewhere outside, but they came from inside. Your urges, your inner motivations, your inner passion for a subject. That is what is most important for success in life later on.
and perhaps during the last session, we'll discuss how to differentiate between these motivations that really come. I mean, like inner motivation and which are externally influenced, or I would say induced. Yeah, so we'll discuss about that. Yeah, it's very interesting topic. So could you tell me about your time at Rajaram College and later at the Institute of Science in Bombay? What were the key subjects that captured your interest? Now you are at a place where you have possibly physics as the main subject. What was the degrees you pursued there and subjects that you studied?
So in those days, there were after high school. So it was slightly different system than it is now. After high school, one had 2 years of college, and after the first year of college, you could go to IIT, because IIT was a 5-year program basically. Or you went to a second year, and it was called intermediate science. And then if you are in the science track, arts track was completely different. I'm just talking about science track. So in your second year, you had to specialize between either you opted for physical sciences or biological sciences. So physical sciences were in those days physics and chemistry and mathematics, and biological sciences were botany and zoology and chemistry. And so chemistry is common to both of them. And so it was called Group A and Group B. And so I was interested in the physical sciences, not biological sciences. But somehow people used to tease me, my dear friends in college, so that every year
Okay,
I always dropped the subject that I was best in. I mean, in the best in terms of grades, in terms of marks, or whatever it is, right? So the
okay,
first year I was first in all of state in the civics and administration. I dropped that. Then I uh, was best in chemistry, and then, so in the second year I dropped that, and so I went uh, into physics and mathematics, and then later on I was better in mathematics, but I dropped that. I kept in physics. So it's basically again this inner interest versus yeah. Okay. Now coming back to professors, and as I was mentioned before, the, none of them did actual research, but they were very good teachers. No, not all of them, but among them there are some very good teachers. There were some who were really parrots. In other words, they had learned their spiel once and for all, and every year they repeated the same thing, and you could tell that they didn't really understand what they were saying, I mean, in the sense that, I mean, they understood the literal word of it. For example, I would go in their staff room and ask them questions. So there was one professor who was very popular because he was very systematic, and everything in blackboard was neat, and year after year it was
Mhm.
exactly the same thing. He used to teach optics, and
Mhm.
I would ask him some, how to solve some very simple optics problems about refraction and such thing, and he had no idea about how to solve the problem. So I really didn't understand the subject. So there were people like that, but there were also people who really understood it. So in physics, I had Professor Dravid. He understood things very, very well, and he was very kind to me. He took me in his folds, if you like, and I would go to his house even and borrow his
Okay.
books from his house and discuss things with him in his house. The same thing was true with my professor in chemistry. He was Professor Vaidya. He encouraged me, for example, in those days to, I was 17 at that time. It was not usual for people to know anything on quantum mechanics at all. In fact, none of my contemporary students knew anything. And so, he encouraged me to sort of
Yeah.
read about old quantum mechanics, not new quantum mechanics, but, Bohr atom and such thing. And I remember I learned about Bohr atom, and then they would even invite me to give a talk to the students, to the whole class, on
Okay.
whatever I had learned. So that was, good for me too, because it also forced me to really, it's when you try to explain something to somebody, then you understand it well. I
That's
kept
true.
telling it to my students all the time. So in that way, they were very good. Right? These professors were extremely good. And similarly, there was a professor of mathematics by name Joe. He was also extremely good, and he's the one who encouraged me to. I mean, he thought he was the only one who thought it was natural that I turned down IIT, and I went to.
Mm.
And as luck would have it, he was transferred to the Institute of Science, or Royal Institute of Science in Bombay, that I went to, because it was also a government college. And then I went in, and again I met him in the Institute of Science there. So I had these very good professors, and they somehow saw that it was worth investing in me in some ways. Another professor of mathematics by name Murdeshwar would give us some very elementary problems in set theory, which you had to solve. So it was very good, and I was very proud when I could actually solve it in the class itself. Right, and I remember that day, very happy
Mhm.
about learning something interesting. And then we had the whole principal of the whole college. He was not in sciences, but because Rajaram College had both arts and sciences, so it was. But he also took interest in me. And in those days, a student could not take books outside the library at all. And so he actually gave me his car so that I could actually take books, and several books out of the library for reading. And I remember people being shocked that he actually just gave me his car. You know,
Yeah, it is.
so what I'm trying to say is that these people were extremely, extremely nice and extremely helpful, and they were excellent mentors who really encouraged me, and I'm most grateful to them all the time, because it's in those early days that you need much more mentorship in some ways.
Did you have any professor or a teacher, like your go-to teacher when you are solving a problem, you're not able to figure out how to tackle this, how to strategize and
Yes. In
solve this?
Rajaram College, I mentioned to you these three people. I mean, Professor Dravid for physics, so Vaidya for chemistry. Yeah, they were always right. But in India, we say, "Well, I have some difficulty," right? Instead of, I'm stuck somewhere, so I have some difficulties, and then you go to them, and they solve. And they were always very kind.
When you received the National Science Talent Scholarship that enabled, weekly TIFR visits, I believe. Could you tell us about that? Based on my basic research, I do understand that it also had a big
Right.
impact.
So I have to tell you, because there's a very nice positive side that we'll spend some time on, but there's also something that I would like to mention about negative side on Indian bureaucratic thing that I think that it still persists, and I feel it is good to be recorded so that maybe somebody
Hmm.
listens to it and does something to it or something like that. So what happened is the following. So in those days, I did my high school. I was 16, and I got this national scholarship. Next year, they announced national talent for sciences, right? But national scholarship in those days was considered to be most prestigious, and national talent wasn't so good. So I saw no reason to apply or to appear for an exam for national talent because I already had national scholarship, which was much more uh, prestigious and much better. But then the next year, that is when I was 18, right? They national talent scholarships, they wanted to attract more people to science, so they suddenly changed their scope and they said that, well, there will be summer schools and the stipend will also be higher, and if you stayed and did masters, it will continue into masters provided your progress was satisfactory, etc., etc. So suddenly then it became better than the national scholarship, which until then was the epitome of everything. So I decided that I would like to apply and to compete for this, right? So I wrote a big letters, saying that, well, I would like to compete. I didn't do it last time because of this reason, etc. So they said, okay, go ahead and compete. So I competed and I got in. I got the scholarship and everything. But ultimately, when I went to Institute of Science, they said, no, you will not get the stipend and you cannot go to the summer schools. You can keep the title, National Talent Scholar. And this is because of some bureaucratic administrative reason. But when the TIFR people took some interest, and when I mentioned to them what had happened, then Professor Yashpal, who was one of the mentors in TIFR, and he then became a very influential person. He was the head of UGC, and he's the one who, for example, went to Supreme Court against some universities in Madhya Pradesh, which were being uh, propped up by politicians, and he won against these politicians, which is pretty amazing. So Yashpal actually said, okay, I'm going to Delhi, give me all the details. So I wrote it all down. He went to them and they said, no, we can't do anything. So this is the kind of thing that should not happen. Now, I usually used to not go into these details because, yeah, the bureaucratic thing and who cares about this slight injustice, something. But nowadays I'm doing it because this is continuing to happen. And currently we
Yeah.
have a postdoc who
Mm-hmm.
from India. That's not my postdoc, but is in the he works in gravitational waves, which is a frontier field. And he, as a PhD student, he also appeared for one of these exams, which is conducted by CSIR, and he won this very prestigious scholarship, which is called Sham Prasad Mukherjee Fellowship, and that is supposed to be cover your PhD years completely. So
Yes, yes,
he then
absolutely.
went to this Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics, IUCA, in Pune, which was started by Professor Naralikar. I had a lot to do with that center, so sometime we'll talk about that also, how it came into existence and many first years of the center. Um, so he went there for this postdoc, and then again for some bureaucrat, he got this scholarship. He has his letter or something, but apparently IUCA
Mm-hmm.
administration didn't send them some letter certifying attendance or something. And for that reason, they refused to pay him. And so he completed his 4-year
It is.
PhD with no money. And so he went into debt. So these things are still happening. And I would like this to be recorded because I would like to both, hopefully, some responsible person comes to realize that
Yeah.
these are talented young people. And in their career, if early on this happens, they are completely, so. And the second thing is that I just wanted the younger people also to be aware of being careful about bureaucratic things because I was not very careful when I was myself young. So I think that's a standard limitation. I happen to be lucky and I somehow managed to survive, but other people who are not careful. Okay. So with this, I got this National Science Talent Scholarship, and then I went to Institute of Science. And then again, I consider myself to be extremely fortunate in many, many ways. And being, first of all, fortunate for good timing, but also fortunate to meet people that I met at the time. And then there were these two people, very senior scientists in TIFR, Professor B.S. Udgaonkar and Professor Yashpal. And they thought that it would be good to try to get younger people interested in science. So they basically invited people who had national talents, science talent scholarship to visit to TIFR once a week and we could, from the Institute of Science, actually, we could take a bus not very far from there, and then go to TIFR, and they would meet us. And the one of their then PhD students, Ramnath Kaushik, who is a very distinguished scientist, is in St. Louis, and he's been director of the institute for the longest time, and is cosmic ray physicist. So he would come, and we would, they would ask us questions, and we would ask them questions. And at one stage, we decided to go through Feynman lectures in physics. In those days, Feynman, these volumes of Feynman's had just come out, which were hot in those days, and that learning physics in this new way of something, Feynman's way and such things. And so we were going through that, and I also, thanks again to Gamo's book, and then I learned a little bit of cosmology in the middle, picked up by myself. So I started thinking that, well, Gamo had a little, qualitative exposure about how the universe was very hot in the beginning and how it cooled down, and what the early universe cosmic history was, and so on. And I kind of felt that, well, I mean, that in those days, people were thinking about, well, what happens if fundamental constants are not really constants, but they're slowly varying in time. So I tried to, write something up saying that maybe the gravitational constant is really not a constant, but it's slowly varying in time. Then, if it is varying in time, how would it vary? So, by dimensional analysis, I related it to fundamental property of the universe, and I said, well, it really depends on that property of the universe, and from there, try to see how, if this was actually the case, if gravitational constant was changing in time, cosmic history would be different from each other. These were very babyish things. I mean, they were not, publishable, but I still, again, had confidence in myself. So I wrote it down. Professor Yashpal and Professor Udgaonkar suggested that I talk to Professor S.M. Chitre. I went and gave him this couple of sheets of paper handwritten about it. And he actually went through it, which is amazing. He gave back very positive feedback and encouraged me very much. So that again built up confidence very much. I mean, there's no question about it. And then this Feynman lectures are not very important. So with Feynman's lectures, in particular, there were a whole bunch of problems in Feynman lectures in physics, and the answers were given, not the solution of the problem, but just the final answer. They were just given listed at the end of the book. And we were asked to go through some problems. So I went to this problem, and I got an answer which was the same as in the book, and I said, I was happy. But then later I realized, that night, that there was a conceptual mistake I had made. And so next day I corrected this conceptual mistake, and I got a different answer. It was different. The functional form was the same, but the numerical coefficient was changed because of this difference. These are important things, because sometimes numerical coefficient can change, seems small, but it can be fundamental mistake. And so again, having this confidence in oneself, and having just the same spirit that did not hesitate me from knocking on the door of Professor Chitre and giving him this sheet of paper, which which was pretty audacious in some ways, of impinging on his time. So similarly, I decided to write a letter to Feynman, and I told him what happened. That the first I got this answer, the second, then I did it again, and then I got this, and I think this is the correct answer. What is in the book is not right. And to my great surprise and incredible pleasure and honor, for Feynman actually replied saying that the book was wrong, you're right. But then, he also concluded by saying, you understand the subject well enough to rely on yourself, I think, indicating that I shouldn't keep writing to him. So, for other similar issues somehow. But to me, that was a big boost in the confidence. This is what I was saying before, that you may have confidence to do those things, but if there is an external validation that comes from some objective means, and of course there could be no further objective means than a letter from Feynman in those days, and so I felt that that was really very helpful. Okay, so and then this letter from Feynman and the evaluation of what I little thing that I had done by Chitre was very, very helpful for me when I applied to PhD programs later on. I was incredibly lucky. It could have happened that Professor Yashpal and Udgaonkar had not decided to do it that year, and then I would not have met any of these people, and nothing of these things will happen. So I want to tell younger people that believe in yourself, and make use of every opportunity you get. That's important also, not just believing yourself, but to make and working very hard. During these years, I was experimenting with life in many ways, right? I mean, like, for example, I took leadership roles in student unions and student activities, process of finding oneself. In retrospect, I feel that that was a mistake. It was a waste of time in some ways for me. But it was a process of finding yourself as to what you can do, what you cannot do, etc., etc. But I also found, and this is another thing for younger people, already in my second year of college, and also my final 2 years of BSc, because I was interested in this other thing like reading final lectures, thinking about cosmology, trying to understand general relativity. I used to go and in the library and try to read Hoyle-Narlikar theory, for example, because in the Institute of Science library there are proceedings of the Royal Society. So, it's not that I understood very much, I should say, but I just got some global idea, global feeling, because unless you can do calculations, you haven't understood things. But gave me some general feeling which about how research is done or whatever it is that are useful. But of course, there's conservation of time. No matter who you are, there are only 24 hours in a day. So if you give this time to
That's so
this, then
true.
of course you're not giving the same time to your curriculum, my usual coursework and something, which I frankly found was boring. But nonetheless, I did. And so in the exams and so on, it's not that I did badly by any means, but I did not do as well as I had done in the very first year, in the first beginning of my end of my high school and beginning of my college years. In the subsequent years in college years, I did not do as well because I had widened my interest in fundamental things. And I just wanted to say that not to get disheartened to younger people if this happens, that it may be, I mean, you still have to do very well, right? You still have to be among the best people, but maybe you're not the best and should not be. Don't take, I mean, I took it to my heart. I was very depressed by the fact that I was no longer the best or something in my class or my university. That I don't think people should do, because there's only 24 hours in a day. You cannot do everything. So if you are going to pursue these fundamental things which are not in the syllabus, well, then your exams are not going to be
Yeah, you may not do well
as
in the
well, right? I
exams
mean, as
because
you would have if you had given all your time to that, or more time to that at least. So
yeah.
but it should not get discouraged.
I think it's very important the gesture that Feynman replied to your query. I think it's very important that prominent scientists and experienced researchers who whom youngsters they look in terms of inspiration. They are their role models. Yes, such a gesture would really inspire young students to pursue further as it provided a boost to you. I think the same way it is important, and I think great people really do that. But I think, yeah, it's very important that everybody does that.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I completely agree with you. I mean, I get again, but there's only 24 hours in the day, and so you cannot do everything you want to do.
yeah,
I get, I mean, I'm always way behind my emails and such things. I get, I don't know, about one letter a week from some young person, like that. It can be from Spain, it can be from Africa sometimes, northern Africa, many times from India, of course, sometimes China. And I make a point to reply to them. Not absolutely every time, but almost every time. I mean, I make a point to
yeah,
reply to them. I often don't reply to the older people because I mean, people sort of say that, well, I'm a, I don't know, computer scientist, and I have this idea about how the universe was born, etc. And then there's a long paper, and I mean, just 24 hours in a day. I mean, you may have the best intentions, but there's just not enough time.
it's,
But I give a priority.
yeah.
Younger they are, I mean, if they're high school, in the end of high school or beginning of undergraduates, I actually give a priority, and I try to reply to them.
During your time at the institute, by what time did you decide that you want to pursue this further, or was it already in your mind that you are going
Yeah,
to pursue
when I
the
went to the institute, I already felt that I should pursue this. I mean, what pursue means was not clear. I mean, it could have been that I just got my uh, PhD in the institute itself, and then went and taught in some college or something, or it could have been. But that I wanted to pursue this was considered, yeah, something that I had already made up my mind. I had to unfortunately say that in the Institute of Science, I did not find any inspiring teacher. They were not bad teachers, but they were not good teachers either. And they were just repeating what was what is in the books and things like that, and they were not, which was a big surprise because I would have expected a quality really better than Rajaram College. Rajaram College, at least, even if they didn't do research, they, as I mentioned before, they encouraged and they did things. Whereas here, they were, I mean, it could just be Bombay is a big city and life takes toll in the sense of just commuting and doing these things already takes so much energy out of you that you don't do. But nobody in the physics department. Mathematics department, yes. Mathematics department, we had Professor Huzur Bazar, who was a
Mm-hmm.
very, very inspiring teacher. He introduced us to completely outside the syllabus to modern methods of algebra, like, algebras, groups, various things, and which were not in the syllabus at all. But he taught us all kinds of things, which was very good. But there was, except for Professor Huzur Bazar, there was nobody in the institute who was inspiring. But then it was compensated thousandfold more by the people in the Tata Institute, who took so much interest in the young people. I think that was really. By the way, I mean, later in my life, I did contact Professor Yashpal and Professor Udgankar again, and it have been very, very nice and very good. I mean, for example, when Ayuka was about to be started, uh, the Professor Yashpal was chairman of UGC, and I wrote to him why I thought Pune would be a good place for it, and because I had actually visited, I discovered what is called Ashtekar variables or new variables by them for general relativity, and I visited Pune mathematics department because they had asked me, and so I wrote to him about this, and so we had very nice contact. So I tried to pay back as much as possible, and for the same reason, I invested a lot of time and energy into Ayuka because it's really giving back. Professor Yashpal and Udgankar had done for me, and that was really giving back to them.
Yeah. By the way, I follow Professor Narlikar's blog, and currently he's writing these series of articles about how Ayuka formed. So he's already published around 6 articles. So currently he's writing the entire story in parts. So
Very
I'm
nice.
reading those. It's very interesting
Yeah,
and
I mean, we used to
fascinating,
say that, yeah,
actually.
these two lieutenants, they are very, very different personality. Professor Naresh Dadich and Ajit Kembavi. They started out in this little house on the campus, which is called Gole Bangla. They
Mhm.
started in that little thing.
Looking back at your undergraduate years, what advice would you give to students who are currently doing this BSc degree, and if they have interest to pursue research, especially in theoretical physics? What kind of advices would you like to give them? One of the major area that I want to focus is the traits and qualities that make a researcher and make someone capable to contribute significantly in a field.
I think in some ways, life for students has become much simpler now because we got internet and there's access, and you can look at YouTube videos and learn things much faster than having to scrounge to bookstores and try to find the appropriate book, at which, I mean, the typical town bookstore
Hmm.
would not have those books and so on and so forth. On the other hand, it's for the same reason. It's always like that in life, namely, one's strongest point is often one's weakest point, I think. So
Hmm.
it's also that this internet, etc., makes life very difficult for them because there is incredible amount of junk there. And so, to me, strong advice would be to really find reliable blogs or reliable YouTube videos, and not just sensational ones. I mean, because the ones which have many, many hits are typically sensational ones. They are not necessarily reliable ones. And so that, I think, is difficult. And so I would say that it's not just students, but also their mentors. That if the mentors could find for students the reliable YouTube videos or blogs, where contemporary issues in science are discussed, uh,
Hmm.
that is something that mentors could do, and the students could also make an effort and not just rely on, oh, this one has so many clicks or so many things. I mean, so I think that there's a treasure that is available there, but that treasure is really completely covered with a lot of junk, right? A lot of dust. So they have to find the appropriate thing, and there is a little work to be done. The second thing is that I mentioned is that, I mean, this is like this bicycle business, right? I mean, don't dive into this pure science at the cost of not paying attention to your college curriculum or your regular
Hmm.
syllabus, your exam, etc. Because there's only one life, and in that life, unless you have a success of certain degree in the eyes of the world, you don't you don't even go further. So you had to do sufficiently well. That's what I meant by saying this balance of this bicycle. You have to do sufficiently well in the gauges by which you are judged. The
Hmm.
exams, whatever it is, your doors are kept open. I know people who say, I'm really interested in fundamental science and I did all this work, but then, I can't get a degree and therefore, I'm thrown out of this thing. These things happen. And the point is that you have to strike this balance. And so don't neglect one thing completely in favor of the other. But in some ways, later in life, that is a quality that is going to serve you most, which is really always striking this balance, because there are always going to be choices, particularly choices between practicalities in order to survive in their practicalities and what your heart really beats. And you have to balance these two things together. So they should sort of follow these new things very much, but not at the cost of neglecting their regular work, even though they might find it boring. They have to do sufficiently better. And then the other thing is that when they do find these YouTube videos or something, they should use them in order to get a, a feel, in order to understand qualitatively what is happening, what are the frontiers of science, etc., etc. But know really deep down that this is the first step. There's a huge on which you have to build a whole building. This is just the first step that you have climbed up here. So
Hmm.
unless you can do things which are detailed, right? I mean, don't say I mean, I get all this message all the time. I got this theory of the universe, right? Because it's something. I mean, no, I mean, theory of the universe is not built in one day like that. You need to have your sharp tools, and therefore
Hmm.
I think that it's extremely, extremely important to also carry the toolbox with you and to develop it, especially at a younger age, to develop it. And it's not only
Hmm.
undergraduates, but also particularly PhD students and so on and so forth. They often just focus on their research and that, whatever the topic that was given to you them by their advisor. And that is really bad, because as time goes on, you have less and less time to broaden out, to learn things, because there are more and more demands on your time. You have committee meetings, you have, you know, proposal to review, you have to, publication pressure. There's all kinds of things that teaching, all kinds of things happen. When you're a student and a postdoc, that is a time to really acquire a lot of technical tools, to have this toolbox that then you'll be able to use somewhere, and also broaden out, right? I mean, broaden out sufficiently. I mean, my PhD advisor, like next time we'll talk when you talk about um, my years in the United States as a student. Uh, he he had a very, very, very beautiful image. He said that for a good scientist, your knowledge should be like a Gaussian. In other words, it should have a peak. Some area in which you really know a lot, but it should not be
Hmm.
like a sharply peaked, like a delta distribution, which is just infinitely peaked somewhere. It should also have breadth. And again, because of one's abilities and one's total time that one has, you know, you cannot have all possible areas, so to say. Area is kind of the constraining factor. So somebody might say, well, I'm very, very broad and not very deep, so to say. That is not a good scientist. Or somebody can say, I'm very, very sharp and very, very narrow. That's not a good scientist either. So you have to have this peak, right? I mean, this Gaussian shape, something in which there are areas in which you know a lot, a lot, a lot. But then there are a lot of nearby areas that you know quite a bit, because your next work will likely not be where your peak is. Your next work will be in these other areas. And the number of people who spend their almost entire life doing research in the same narrow area in which they got their PhD thesis is large. And that, I think, is not very productive. I think you have to change. I mean, the extreme example of this, of course, is Professor S. Chandrasekhar, who changed his very area of research every 10 years of his life. That I think very few people can do.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, having this Gaussian image of your knowledge is something that postdocs and students should keep in mind.
That's a very valuable advice, sir. Thank you, sir, so much for sharing your remarkable journey so far. And we'll continue this story and we'll have other sessions where we can continue and explore your time in the US and also later.
Take care.
Thank
Bye
you so
bye.
much. Thank you so much.